And now, please welcome co-founder and business development director of Pelorus, Jimmy Carroll, in conversation with Skift editor-in-chief, Sarah Kopit.
Thanks for being with us, Jimmy.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
All right, so first, you have such an interesting company. Tell us about Pelorus.
I think whoa, that's loud. When we formed Pelorus about 6 years ago, we wanted to really look at what would make a difference. And that was what Her Majesty's government had trained Geordie, my business partner, and I to do, and that was lead military operations around the world. So we took that mantra and how we plan military ops and said, let's change that into a travel and yacht planning expedition tool. And so every single trip that we deliver goes through this funnel. And it means that we leave no stone left unturned, but those are the foundations, and then it's the creativity that we pour on top. And really, the creativity is the limit of your imagination. And very much like military operations, a lot of it is that there isn't a set structure where you're going, and so we have to build it sometimes.
Yeah. So why don't you give the audience some examples of the type of trips you go on, what your typical client is like, what you do, all of that.
Yeah, I think through this talk we want to cover off a couple of key parts, and there's three elements to that. The nature of our trips is for the high net worth, ultra high net worth, and as you'll see from that stat, which came up on the slide just there, clients are now looking for more and more, and that is hyper-personalization. We're seeing it through luxury brands at every element. But what does that really mean when it comes into going on a trip? Technology is brilliant. It is sped up so much, and we absolutely embrace it and use it. But actually, we want to slow back down. The really important things in life, people want to have the best device on, their wealth, their health, etc. They spend a lot of time. They go out for dinner with their wealth managers. They invest time in that. And we've taken that mantra to really drill into our clients and understand them more than anyone else. Go to their houses and see how they live their lifestyle. And from that, we can then really personalize trips. And I think part of that is some of the stories there that we'll talk about is a trip in Portugal earlier this year where we had an 86-year-old who's a massive motorbike fan. His son, who's 57, who's a world Ironman champion, and then his grandson, who's 22. How do we blend that together to create something utterly unique where three different generations are being fulfilled in their desires from the travel, but we're creating lasting memories together? Or even the image that you see there, which is from British Columbia. That was in October, and it's about the senses. Getting to understand the client. The client is a big Burning Man fan. They want to have the greatest sensory experience that you could imagine. So when we're on the recce to British Columbia, we realized how do we enhance the sounds of the animals we're going to see walking through the rainforest, being on the glacier and hearing the ice cracking. So we went away and found an IMAX sound technician, and we took him out, and he recorded the sounds in the most advanced recordings you could get. And then when the client came for the trip, as you can see from that picture, we had those Apple AirPod Maxes laid out. That was a floating pontoon that we put out into the ocean. And this was just before we had a whale experience, and they put the headsets on. And then through this broadcast system that we created, we then amplified the sounds of the whales for them before they then went out and saw orcas and kind of doing their thing out in British Columbia, or if it was in the rainforest, hearing the sounds of a bear catching a salmon, and the boom of that microphone was only 3 foot above the bear, but for the client, it's now driven into their ears in the most intense way.
So I have to ask, how much do these trips cost? What is your average cost for one of your client trips?
Yeah, we certainly operate at the higher end of the budget. The average trip that we're producing is $140,000.
And what about at the high end? What's the most expensive one, Ben?
What's the most expensive?
Yeah, what's the most expensive?
Multiple seven figures.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so tell me about, we were talking in the green room earlier, I want to hear about the most extreme trip that you've done for a client.
Personalization is getting to know the client and their intent. What do they want to achieve from it? So a lot of it can be, such as that trip in British Columbia, is a real connection with wildlife conservation. It could be a learning trip, and I'll talk about one again in a minute. I think the most extreme far right of arc trip that we've done was a kidnapping, where we kidnapped 10 clients in the jungles of Cambodia and created an alternate reality. The lead client for his 40th birthday, he did know about the kidnapping, the rest of them didn't. We had to create fake news reports, we had to psycho-profile the clients, and we're leading them through it. We had a film team embedded in the bush, so when 26 actors and 2 helicopters emerged at 5:30 in the morning to storm the camp, we had it all recorded, and we're capturing every element of it. And you have to learn how to soften and harden these things. There was one client on the trip who started a sniff that maybe this wasn't as real as it was, so that played to our advantage. We removed them from the group, and everyone thought, wow, okay, this is serious again.
So I'll give you all a little story about how kind of the sausage is made for these things. I was going through making my notes for this talk today, and we were talking in the green room, and he told me this story. I'm like, can I ask you about that? And he said yes. I'm like, okay, that'll probably be one of the more interesting things that that the folks here at this convention hears over these next few days. So have you ever had an unhappy client?
I caveat this in what makes someone unhappy, and that is the program, the planned itinerary may change. A lot of that is out of our control, wildlife and weather. But because of the way we plan everything in that military model, contingency plans are thorough all the way through. So there's always an A, B, C. So if we can't fly, and I think the biggest thing is being able to stand up and say no to a client, especially some of the clients that we have. A lot of people would be intimidated by that. But safety is absolutely the paramount and foremost of everything we do. So if the weather changes and we can't fly in a helicopter, we would tell the client that that's a no. That could cause an unhappiness, absolutely. But it's what we're going to do instead. And I think this comes back to that hyper-personalization. Although you have a set program, the program is adaptable. And true personalization and true luxury is something that is tailored to you, and that can be evolving as you go on throughout the trip.
Let's talk about some of like the main kind of types of trips you do. Tell me about how your work with like Gen
Alpha.
Yeah, Gen Alpha.
This is a massively growing trend we've seen since the end of the pandemic, and that's Gen Alpha wanting to get fully involved in the planning process, and it was brought up earlier actually with you, Sarah. I was recently on a trip in New Zealand 2 weeks ago with a client and his 12-year-old daughter. The entire planning process was with both of them. These children have more information than we've ever imagined people could have at the fingertips of their hand. So she's coming to the planning session, talking about what she's learning at school, what she's reading online, the David Attenborough program she's watched. She's picking apart the itinerary to then drill me. I'm 41, being challenged by a 12-year-old. It's great. We love it because actually it really pushes our bounds of creativity. But more and more children are involved, and it's no longer being dictated to by the matriarch going, we're going on holiday here. This is what we're doing. And I think that's a great area to look at, certainly with conservation, which is up there right now. The kids are the one really driving the conservation level. We did a heli-skiing operation in Antarctica. We had two yachts, a super yacht, a support yacht with 2 helicopters on it. Because of that support yacht, we were able to take 5 scientists down with us to Antarctica, study the penguin colonies, tag whales, and there was an 11-year-old going out scooping up penguin poop with the scientists, and then they're studying it back on the ship. And they are driving that. It's great to see. And I think for us at Pelorus, we charge everyone a tax, and that's 1% of the overall trip fee. And that goes into our climate investment fund and carbon capture and other initiatives that we set up because we wanted to really lead from the forefront and support projects around the world where we are.
Yeah, it's very heartening when you talk to the youth, what they're doing and what they like to do. Tell me a little bit about what you're finding in the metaverse and how that type of technology is really kind of forming the ideas about what, some of these really exotic experiences might be.
It's another tool to really enable us to sell.
Yeah.
And it brings the remote region to the home, ultimately. Again, children are certainly leading this way. I think most of them are far better equipped at this environment than their parents. And it's something that we've got to adapt to and look at. But ultimately, it's never going to take, in my view, it's never going to take away from that experience. And when we can get in and see clients and go to their homes, their offices, and meet them firsthand, what are we talking about? We're talking about stories. We're in the business of storytelling. And why? Because when we go away on trips, you can't take the natural environment back with you. You can't bring the animals back with you. We can create memories, and I can film it and photograph it, and we can send that to you later. But it's about the stories that the clients are then telling at lunch and dinner when they're home with their friends and family. And that's what's absolutely key. And that will never be taken away, in my view, by the metaverse. It will just be enhanced because you could tell the story and maybe put an Oculus on later.
Tell me about some of the gamma destinations.
Yeah, I think the world is getting busier and busier, for sure. Machu Picchu's just announced that it's going to up the amount of tourists that can go there every year. You go to the extremes of Everest, and that is getting busier and busier. So where else can we take people? And I think a lot of our clients want world firsts, areas that have been untrodden. And so right from the beginning of Pelorus and taking that military mantra, we've been looking at areas where we can break new ground and go into regions and where we can develop and build them. Some of those places, Saudi here in the Middle East, very well known, but right from the beginning of Pelorus, that's been at the forefront. And now, having done consultancy into the region about experiences that we could build, we then launched the DMC for this top tier of travel called Rome. And we're working with some of the giga projects, Sindala, etc., but also looking at other regions in Saudi outside those giga projects where we can create experiences, mobile camps, and TF, etc. And I think that's really exciting. You have to remember a lot of Saudis don't even know much about their country, having not had the opportunity to travel a huge amount. But then Socotra, the island off Yemen, phenomenal place, absolutely unbelievable. It's a complete oasis. Chad, Gabon, a couple of areas in Africa, Eritrea, another one in the Red Sea. But when you go into these places, because you are breaking new ground, we're having to have government ministerial meetings, we're looking at how we could even implement things. So Eritrea was a fascinating one. We had a client who wanted to dive in the Red Sea. It's probably got some of the best diving on the Dalek Islands there is. It's untouched. The whole country's been locked down, but taking a 100-meter super yacht in there, you can't just rock up and wave your hands and say hi.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating, but I think that's it harks back a little bit to our military days again, through diplomacy and soft influence, and a lot about what we do at Pelorus. We use a lot of the traditional travel network and DMCs and other people, but actually it's really about our black book. And the black book into contacts into government links, military links, people who have worked on David Attenborough shows. Is it a professor from a university? The New Zealand trip, we brought in a volcanologist and a glaciologist to really give a different perspective to not just the 12-year-old, but the father. So they're taking something away completely different from that.
So talk to me a little bit about the personalization that you were telling me earlier, how when you visit a client, you might look at their home, see what they're interested in, and a little bit about your thought process when you're planning these.
Yeah, you can get pretty personal.
Yeah.
And Yes, we're set with, we've created a whole document which we try and farm as much data from. But actually people are most relaxed when they're at home in a natural environment. But also, if you ask people questions, they're not always going to have the answers ready to hand. And this particular client in California 2 months ago, I was walking around their house and she's showing me the artwork and there was a common theme and it was coastlines. She'd never brought this up. Subsequently, since then, we're creating a 3-year travel plan for her to go to all the different environments over the next 3 years. But part of that is looking at coastal regions around the world, from where the jungle meets the coastline to Alaska, where the glaciers are carving into the ocean. But that would never have come about. And I picked up on that, sensed it, and then when we were going back with our pitch and proposal, we had this, travel through the world via the coasts, and she was blown away by it. She was like, how did you pick that up, etc. So we're talking, it's just coming out. And the same as, if you're building a mobile camp, I've asked a client, how many times he was an elderly gentleman, and they alluded to certain things. I said, you get up in the night to go to the loo? He said, yeah, 2 or 3 times. So this is quite a personal question. I was like, absolutely. But we're building a mobile camp for you. I want you to feel as rested and relaxed as you would be at home in this camp, in the wilderness in Africa. So I'm going to put the toilet, the lavatory, as close to you as possible, where it's good and not too close. Yeah. But it means you're not walking around the side of the bed, etc. It's like blown away. Yeah. And I think when you're getting into that level of granularity, that is true luxury and personalization.
Who are most of your clients? Like, from what areas of the world?
It's fully international. The American market is growing massively. It's doubled for us in the last year, and now equates to about 60%. They have the propensity to spend and a desire to travel differently. I also think we offer a very different product to anyone else that's ever come before, certainly in America. But we have clients as far as Australia, the Far East, Brazil, Mexico, and then a big cohort in the Middle East as well now. And that's certainly growing. We're seeing a lot of Saudis want to travel like we've never seen before as well.
How do you deal with governments from around the world? Because there must be, for a lot of these things, you're going to have to go pretty close to the top to get approval.
Yeah, you have to find the right people.
Yeah.
And I think we're lucky with a few of our network, but also it leads back into that conservation piece. If you are doing a big trip and breaking new ground, what can we give back? Yeah. Can we bring scientists in and study the ecological patterns somewhere? Can we feed that back into the country, the region that we're going to? And that certainly gets people's attention very quickly.
What's your favorite trip that you've ever planned?
I think probably Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. I think Papua New Guinea is definitely one of those kind of gamma destinations. The infrastructure's pretty small there, but if you go in with the right assets, it's just a fascinating place. And the beauty about somewhere like Papua New Guinea is that you have a couple of key elements which I always try and harness people to think about. What might not be here in the next 5 to 10 years? Tribes are diminishing as we speak. Vegetation and wildlife. Papua New Guinea has an abundance for all of those, and it's got an amazing story to tell. So, that's probably up there. But Alaska, is incredible as well. The wilderness is just mind-blowing.
What do you do in Alaska?
What do you not do in Alaska? The Super Cub planes are amazing. They literally take off on a runway as big as this stage. Amazing heli trips. You've got fly fishing, glaciers, swimming in a glacial lake, which is freezing. That's pretty awesome. Amazing skiing, northern lights at the right time of year, hiking. There's so much.
So much. Okay. Jimmy Carroll, thank you so much.
Thank you.